Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Another Way podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. This week, we have a special guest for you, as we always do. This week, we have May Samali. May and I met in Peru last year in 2025 when we trekked to Machu Picchu together with the Mountains and Marathons team. It was an incredible trip, and as you are going to experience in this episode, and as I got to experience on the trek, May is an incredible person, very knowledgeable, but also brings such an infectiously positive attitude to everything that she does. So expect to walk away from this episode understanding more about what it means to be a leader, understanding what it takes to follow your dreams, also understanding what it looks like to really, what success looks like in terms of leading and building a company. She's worked with a lot of different founders and leaders around the world, and we're extremely grateful to have her on the podcast today. You are going to walk away feeling inspired, if nothing else, and well educated too. And here's a little bit of background about May so you know who you're listening to. May is the founder and CEO of Human Leadership Lab. As a speaker, facilitator, coach, researcher, investor, and board director, she helps organizations and individuals unlock leadership potential and sustain high performance. She is a fellow at the Institute of Coaching at Harvard Medical School and holds a professional certified coach credential from the International Coaching Federation. In 2024, she was recognized as one of the top 15 coaches in Sydney by Influence Digest. May is also a venture partner at 77 Partners and recently served on the board of directors for Inspirato, formerly a NASDAQ ISPO, prior to its acquisition. She holds a Master of Public Policy from Harvard University, if you don't mind. Her early career as a corporate lawyer, venture capital investor, and tech CEO sparked a deep interest in helping people develop the mindsets, skills, and systems required for human leadership and sustainable high performance. May's insights on leadership have been featured in Forbes, Australian Financial Review, ABC Radio National, and Stanford Social Innovation Review, and now the Another Way podcast. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation with May. I am so grateful to her for coming on the podcast, and I expect that you'll enjoy this conversation and walk away with a big smile on your face. I will see you on the other side. All right, we are on. Mics are rolling. Welcome back to another episode of the Another Way podcast. Today I am joined by May Samali from Bondi Beach, Australia. May, thanks for coming onto the podcast today.
Thanks so much, Matt. It's so awesome to be here. Not in person, but almost good enough.
I know, not in person, but you know what? With our travel itineraries, it's very hard to get us in the same place at once.
That's very true. Between all them, and we met on a mountain, so that says it all, right?
That's right. Well, that's actually where I wanted to start our conversation, because May and I met in Peru last year on a leadership retreat with Mountains and Marathons, and she's about to get on a plane to fly to Nepal to do Everest Base Camp with the crew as well. But I wanted to start by asking you, May, what made you say yes to trekking the Salcantay and Inca Trail last year when we did meet? What actually led you to joining that journey?
Amazing question. And when I've been asked, why are you paying money to go do something that feels torturous? Actually, I'll tell you a fun story. My sister, when I told her what I'd signed up for last year, she just looked at me and said, "You're literally paying money to do something that I would pay money to not do." And it got me thinking, because you're right. I think sometimes in the circles we're in, this is the type of thing that we revel in. And when I step back and go, what is it that made me say hell yes to that experience? One, the ability to actually be completely offline. I think I was at a period running the business, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that, the irony is, you're helping people stay grounded, holistic, and managing their energy. And I felt like I was probably not doing a really good job of that myself. So I knew this would be a forced break from being online, and from constantly giving. And whilst we had an opportunity to be leadership partner in that role, like, it was also a lot of getting and nourishing, to just being in nature and a part of the world that, you hear so much about the power of Pachamama, Mother Nature, Mother Earth in that part of the world. It's such a spiritual center. And to get to do that with an amazing group of people, there's so much structure and intention with each day that we had together on the mountain. It was unlike anything I'd really been pitched before. And to be able to do it and bring some of the leadership skills and get to kind of flex that muscle, but also just participate and be present and deeply connect. I don't know how you felt about it, Matt, but those like 8 or 9 days felt like 8 weeks by the time you come
Oh
back.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
a
Especially
very
when I started
different
getting
person.
sick.
Yeah, yeah, poor
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
You were a trooper on that one. But I think that's it, right? Like you go through an entire mental, emotional, physical, spiritual journey on these kind
Mhm,
of types of experiences. So
mhm,
I would do it all again. I am, in fact, doing it all again in a different way. So clearly it wasn't that bad. It was really fun. And like I think the most important thing, the thing that lasts is, you've got obviously the fun memories and snapshots and beautiful nature, but it's the deep connections with other humans like yourself. That's what is, I think, the part I didn't expect would be so
mhm.
beautiful.
Yeah, totally, totally. And maybe I actually realized I should be calling you Starfish, because we did give each other trail names on this trek. It's a bit of a
Oh,
tradition we introduced.
only if I can call you cowboy.
For the sake of this podcast, I think we should.
All right, cowboy, what do you got?
All right. Well, I mean, you seem like the kind of person that says yes to an adventure, and I know you celebrated a pretty significant birthday recently. You're in your last year of your 30s.
That's correct.
Um, but I guess I wanted to start because I really wanted to have a conversation with you. You work in the leadership space, but you've
Mm,
also been on a real founder entrepreneur leadership journey
mm.
yourself. And there's so many different directions we could go with. But I guess where I wanted to start was by asking you, when do you remember first making a decision that was really from a place of true leadership in your own life or in your own business?
Look, it's probably something that I think about constantly. Now I would say more and more I'm making decisions from that place. But if I zoom back or rewind back, I would say it'd probably be in my mid 20s. I was working as a corporate lawyer. I went into law because I had this deep passion for social justice growing up. I am the first child and first grandchild from my dad's side of a Persian Baha'i family. My parents emigrated to Australia before we were born. They lived in the US for a bunch of years, which was kind of what pulled me there later. But they're originally from Iran and were a religious minority. And so had they stayed in Iran and had us in Iran, I wouldn't have been able to go to university. There are a lot of other freedoms that wouldn't have been given. So when I did kind of go to school in Australia, I was born here. I felt really conscious of the opportunities before me and how lucky I was. And so that actually led to this like pursuit of excellence, got to make the most of every opportunity. I don't think it's unfamiliar or it's not kind of novel to me. I think we see this with a lot of second generation or first generation immigrants. And I had the pleasure of getting exposed to some really cool things in high school and fell in love with social justice. And so I pursued kind of law as that avenue. Now, of course, you get told you should go and work for a judge or go into corporate law, get the training before you go and do the human rights law thing. And I did that. And I quickly realized how much that squeezed me into a box and the expectations of what it meant to be a lawyer just felt so misaligned with how I wanted to show up. I have some journal entries from that era. This is when I think I forgot my first iPhone, and your Apple Notes saves over time.
Do you have them with you right now?
Well, yeah, I actually, in
Can you pull one
preparation
up?
for the conversation, yeah. So there's one entry here that like actually made me laugh, and I'll tell you why in a second. And that I'm talking about for our Christmas gift at the corporate law firm, we were all given these little cactus plants to put on our desk, and I loved it. And I was reflecting my journal entry about how is this the only thing that's truly alive in the workplace? This plant. And then I thought about, what I did was then I essentially brought like 50 plants in and I put all these photos on the wall. And, I kept giving instructions like stop wasting time, stop asking people how they are. It was just this you've got too much personality. You're too boisterous. And at the time, I didn't really understand. I thought maybe I am disruptive. Maybe this is. But I have memories of staff coming into my room, closing the door. This is when juniors used to have their own room and opening up to me about what they found hard or inhuman about the workplace. And this is not to demonize law or corporate law, but these are the structures and institutions we're in. At the same time, the Olympics had happened that year. I think it was in 2012. We had Aussie Olympians coming back to Australia and they did their like famous march through town hall in Sydney, and I went with one of my colleagues, and I was obsessed with the Olympics growing up. So I got like signatures of athletes all over my arm because I didn't have paper with me. And I came back to the office, and there were moments where I could see my actions being authentically me, whether it was excited, joyful, sporty, it was tapered down, like an invitation to taper it down, to turn the volume down. And there was another diary entry I found, which kind of made me a little bit more sad and curious then about the work that I do now. The questions started to arise back then, which was one of the partners that I was working for fainted one day from overwork. And when the paramedics came to get her, like quite literally, we were on the, level 35 of one of the buildings in Sydney. She refused to go with them. And she said, she's okay. She's got too much work to do. And then later when I went to see her, because I cared about her, are you okay? Like, is there anything we can do? Are you sure you don't want help? And she just laughed it off and said, well, the paramedics were so hot, weren't they? And I could see she was just trying to ease the situation, but there were these data points all around me that something is not right here. And so this is a long way of saying, I think I didn't know at the time, like, am I a weird, crazy person who expects joy and things and I need to like become professional? Or is there something wrong about this system that we've normalized, like getting a little cactus is crazy, amazing? Or that like when someone faints, it's okay for them to not go because they have too much work. And I think it was the pull I was feeling towards working with people and opportunities that were pushing the envelope, creating new things. And during my time in law, I had the privilege of working with some startups, like being more of a startup lawyer, the incorporation documents, the less sexy stuff. But I started to like get really involved in this work of social entrepreneurship. There were some social entrepreneurs around me. Like, May, you're a lawyer. Could you get us company constitution, or does this look right? Should we become a non-profit or a for-profit? I was like, oh, this is like really amazing, this other thing. And what I did during my couple of years in corporate law is I essentially signed up to every foundation, committee, opportunity that was like available to me, but was essentially more around supporting entrepreneurship, the social mission part of things. And that original, I guess, part of me as a teenager that wanted to become a lawyer was about social impact and social mission. And so I found my way back there and out of law, and it took winning a scholarship from the John Monash Foundation, getting into Harvard to really leave that system. I don't know if I would have had the courage at the time to simply just be in Sydney and not do corporate law. I almost needed an excuse to get me out of the country, get me out of the relationship I was at the time with my boyfriend, get me out of the career. And that was when everything changed. But that I look back at that moment as when I really started to choose another way. And that was the scariest choosing of another way. But I feel like since then, there's like constant crossroads and it feels, there's more of a muscle memory, like, oh yeah, I can choose the other way now. There's obviously always a bit of a like fear and loss, but you like feel the fear and do it anyway.
Yeah, totally. That's amazing. Yeah, I feel like it's like there's the big choosing of another way, and then there's all the small choices that come afterwards, and you just like, it's not like you get to choose and that's it. There's just continue recommitting to it.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, as you're describing this situation of the cactus and the paramedics and the overwork, I almost feel like I'm watching some dystopian sci-fi movie, right? Like it is quite weird, and it can leave those people that are more heart-centered, are more connected to themselves, really looking around thinking that they're the crazy ones, when actually it's the culture, it's what's been normalized that's not normal at all, or not natural at all.
Exactly. And I think that's the danger of not stepping outside whatever system you're in and looking inwards, because you become the product of whatever you're around. And we hear these famous adages around, you become the average of the 5 people you're around. But I think, and actually, this is relevant to the cactus, bear with me.
Please bring it back.
One thing I also had written about, and I reread, and I vividly remember my colleague Carlos was next door to me. He was an amazing mentor to me at the time. And his cactus was dying and mine was thriving. And I said to him, what if we moved your cactus next to mine? I think I've read somewhere that plants like speak to each other and their energy fields. I'd read some of these studies that showed like if you talk to a plant with positivity, And we put them next to each other, and sure enough, we didn't change anything in the soil, and it started to thrive. And I started to become really curious about, well, if this is what happens with plants, as humans, like that must be 10x, right? What happens when our positive and negative energies are combining? And that was the beginning of really paying attention to energy attunement, energy alignment, and like that intuitive feeling, starting to trust it. Like there's something more than what the eye can see. But that was a weird thing to probably be thinking at that time. I say that because in that kind of system, there was less language for that. I think now in our workplaces, people are more aware of energy management, but still, if we're not careful, we become a product of whatever system. And look, it's not just workplaces. I was a product of being brought up in an immigrant family, being Persian, having religious parents. There are other things that I didn't question about myself until I stepped outside the system, whether it's my sexuality, whether it's I wanted to be a lawyer, whether it was, how I dressed, how I showed up, who I had in my company as friends. That's the power of stepping outside whatever system, because you don't even realize you've become it. And you ultimately realize you haven't been at choice. You've just kind of gone wherever the current took you. And if you had choice and intentionality, you might actually choose something quite different.
It's interesting when I reflect on all the different things that make up who May is. It feels like in many ways there's a lot of different things that are almost stacked against you in terms of being an immigrant, being from a different country, being from a different religion to the majority of Australia, exploring your sexuality. I imagine, and now, the person I've met, I've only known for less than a year. But like, what I see is like a woman that's a very confident and a heart-centered leader. And I can only imagine, and I guess this is where the question's leading as well, is that there have been times where it's been hard to show up with all those different things. And like, can you paint the picture of that a little bit more? Because I listened to everything you've described about your background, and I'm like, wow, she's, unfortunately, Australian culture maybe gone through some shit.
Yeah, look, I appreciate the naming of it. I have to say, also, I had it much easier than many folks, in the sense that I grew up without an accent because I was born here, right? My parents could speak English, so even though they were immigrants, there was I want to name that because that definitely creates a difference in terms of experience, right? And I was a sporty, intellectual, athletic kid, so that gets you quite far in Australian culture in particular, where we love our sports. There were definitely challenges though, and I think there was some internalized racism, if we want to go there. So I actually have vivid memories of being 11 or 12, grade 6, primary school, wanting to be a prefect. That leadership bent started back then. Wanted to bring the school together, like wanted to unite the school. My dad really encouraged me. We wrote an amazing speech. I loved public speaking, unsurprisingly. And I practiced, I'd memorized, I had my palm cards ready to go. I didn't even have to look at them once, that the kid that age that's like nailing it. And my dad on the day of was like, are you excited to give your speech? And I said, actually, I don't think I'm going to do it. And he said, why not? You love this, like you want to do it, your speech is amazing. And I said, I don't think they're going to vote, like I'm not going to get voted for because students would vote. And he said, why not? I said, because I have black hair. And he said, and? And I genuinely thought, well, because I have black hair, they're not going to vote for me because other people that are running don't have black hair. And it's not that actually anyone had been racist towards me directly, right? But I think when you grow up noticing some difference, and a lot of us have it in different ways. It could be the way you walk or the way you talk or like what your interests are, your religion, your race, ethnicity, culture. I think these things definitely I was attuned to them. So, I think that definitely made it more difficult growing up. I think there was a quashing of maybe what I actually wanted to do throughout the years. Once I became aware of my ambitions, whether it was like not actually wanting to practice law and wanting to help entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, whether it was as an investor or as a coach or to build cool things, to maybe not live in Australia for a while. I was in the US for about 8 years. What became difficult and what some of the challenges were really around communicating that. Because the reality is, even if you feel it, like I'm going to be on my authentic self, we're not on an island, and like there's an entire systems around us, our family, sometimes our partner that we're with, the professions, our friends. And so there's this constant, as you're like redesigning your life and who you are, there's like, how does that impact and have ripple effects? And I think initially that meant funny, cute things like I was, moving from different roles. I started, I moved into kind of doing my master's in policy and entrepreneurship, and then wanted to go work at this like random new accelerator in San Francisco that then turned into a venture capital fund. And I'd have these moments where my parents were like, are you sure you wanted to leave corporate law? And I'd say, yes, yes. And then, a few years later, that might look like, so May, they'd text me, could you send us a paragraph about what you actually do? Because like family friends are asking and we don't know what to say. Like,
So
could you send us
relatable. So relatable.
like they'd copy and paste it and they're just like, how's May? Oh, good. She lives in San Francisco. She's working as a venture
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, well, that was a bit of a challenge because you want to be seen, you want to be understood. But it wasn't coming from a bad place, right? It was a genuine desire to want to connect. I think some of the other moments that felt really challenging for me, I think whilst I had moved out of, say, law, Australia, I'd gone and done my own thing, I was still in the old framing and prison, I should say, in that there was still an over association with the work I did. Like I still was collapsing my identity with my role or my relationships or where I was living. And I'll give you a quick example of why this caused me a lot of pain. When I was about 30, 31, I should probably remember because at the time it was a very big deal. So about a decade ago, I was working in venture capital in San Francisco. It was like a really amazing opportunity. We were raising a new fund. I had been offered an opportunity to kind of step up more. I loved the work. The founders were wonderful, but there was a bit of values misalignment in terms of how we treat our entrepreneurs. And choosing to speak up and disagree at the time meant that I was let go from the role, right? Now that meant my visa was immediately in question and I was on the list to be deported if I hadn't gotten that sorted within a month. You can probably relate as an Australian living in America, like these are things we have to be aware of, our visas and legality. At the same week, my ex-girlfriend broke up with me. So I had suddenly role gone, relationship gone, potential visa gone, and it literally felt like the carpet was being pulled from under me. I remember not going to the bathroom, and excuse if there's too much information, for 24 hours. Like my body was in actual shock and I didn't know what to do. I felt embarrassed. I felt ashamed. I thought like, what do I do? Who do I ask for help? Now I had some amazing friends around me that one or two I could call and share what had happened. I had a great immigration lawyer who helped. The story ends really nicely in that was the best thing that could have happened to me to force me to go into an operator role. Then I learned I love building people up, but I still love working with entrepreneurs, and it eventually leads to what I'm doing now. Had that not happened, I might have still been trying to pursue the venture capital path to become a partner. And at the same time, I might still be living in California where, while it was amazing, I think there was a part of my identity that wasn't fully reconciled by escaping Australia. To come back to Australia, to own my sexuality, to own my professional identity, to have such a beautiful relationship with my parents, my broader community, to establish a new community is, I think, the ultimate reconciliation or freedom, or like it's another way, but almost looks from the outside like where I was 15 years ago, and yet everything might look the same, but it's completely different, feels completely different, even if I'm in the same city, and that to me is like a really great indication also of, you don't know, like some of these challenges as they came up, they felt completely debilitating, but you don't know what's coming. And it reminds me of that, famous Chinese parable or fable around the farmer and his son, and all these events are happening to the farmer. And he keeps saying, who knows what is good or what is bad. And it really feels like that, in that some of the, what I call like worst moments of my life, whether it was 2014 when my boyfriend broke up with me at the time and I felt like no one in corporate law understood me, to being fired and broken up with, almost 6-7 years later. Had those events not happened, I wouldn't have had the opening to the next thing, which has brought so much more alignment, joy, and that's really something I try and remember when things don't go my way. Because maybe that's not meant to go that way. Maybe there's a better way.
That's right. And I'm like, as you're talking, like it makes me also think of the hero's journey framework, the rites of passage framework, of, going out into the call to adventure and then reintegrating, returning back to your community with new
Oh
lessons,
yeah.
new stories, new characteristics that you get to give back to your family, to community, that sort of thing.
Never had someone refer to that as the hero's journey, but I love that. And it's like, yeah, those 8 years away. Really, it's interesting you bring that up, Matt, and it's relevant because when I first got back to Australia in 2021, it was mid-pandemic. I came back because my visa had expired. I decided to do my own thing, right? But for the first couple years of being back, I almost hid being back because I didn't know if I wanted to go back to the US. I didn't want to be back in Australia. And at the time, I didn't know what structure it would take. It's now Human Leadership Lab, there's a whole company structure. But back then, it was I'm tinkering, experimenting with coaching and a few other things. And I remember being at my best friend's son's second birthday. It was probably like 2022 or something. And there was a couple of old folks from high school days who I have a couple of good friends from high school, but many of my friends are from subsequent chapters. I think the parents were well intentioned, but they whispered to the mother of my best friend, "Oh, May's back in Australia. What happened?" As if it was like something bad must have happened that she'd return. Because you don't like go off and do amazing things and then come back. Did something controversial happen? Yeah, what is she up to? Did she come back for a great job? No, apparently she's just a coach. And it was that was also difficult because I actually didn't know exactly what I wanted to do yet, but I did know I wanted to move in a direction of building something myself and working with amazing founders. And so whilst coming back to Australia has provided a lot of strength, I think now, like this is probably the most aligned I've ever felt. Those first few years back were actually really difficult in a different way because you've gone through all these changes, but then people are trying to put you in a square peg in a round hole, or assuming something controversial or bad must have happened for you to want to come back to Australia. So, and I still had, after working in venture, a couple years working in an amazing ed tech company, and everything was going really well. In fact, it was a very hard decision to talk to my global CEO to say, look, I love this, but I want to start my own thing. And so slowly transitioning off that, losing my visa as a result, which was inevitable to then come, there was so much courage required to actually say no to that and come back to Australia. And then it was received as, and this is not everyone, this is like people usually that don't know you. But when you remember that people who love you and know you want the best for you and almost drowned out the rest of the noise, I think life becomes much easier. But I had to sometimes learn the hard way. And that people pleasing saboteur or tendency would show up in moments like this where I'd be like, no, I'm not just a coach, or that inner defensiveness. And I've learned to just let it go because we're all on our own journey. And like, actually, not everyone has to understand why you're living your life the way you are. People who are curious or receptive will ask, and otherwise, that's energy that's expended on the wrong thing.
Totally. And I feel like that one of the prices you pay for entry of choosing yourself and choosing to follow your own path is you're going to be misunderstood. And there's going to be so many different people that don't have the context and couldn't possibly have it to properly understand. And I feel like it's a part of the journey that you need to make peace with if you're gonna choose the path. Yeah.
Brené Brown and Adam Grant, I think, had a conversation last week where they were debating authenticity, and they talked about how authenticity isn't just rocking up to the world and being like, "This is who I am." It actually has to be earned in that it's like the people that know you and create space for you, or the communities. That's where you can fully show yourself in service of connection. Not everyone actually deserves to or needs to know everything about you, and that's really helped in that authenticity can mean different things about what you put out there.
Totally. Yeah. And also it's about having discernment with the different parts of yourself and sides of yourself you share. It's like let's not let authenticity just mean I'm unhinged. I'm just take me as I am. And because then it's like it's a bit irresponsible as part of that. But there's when we haven't healed those parts of us, that's and I'm guilty of this, like having in the past not healed those parts and being like, I just want to show up wherever I want. Recognizing like there's actually some inner healing to do as part of that.
Yeah.
Uh, I feel like I want to get to some core topics with you because I know the work you do and I really want the people that are listening to like hear your perspective on these things. You've mentioned Human Leadership Lab a few times. I guess can you tell us a bit more about how you got to creating this and what it's about?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start with kind of Human Leadership Lab is currently the company that I run. I founded it about 3-4 years ago, and really our intention, think of it as a leadership development company. It's very much founder-led, and that hasn't always been the case, but founder-led company where we work with mostly organizations and individuals to really build and unlock the mindsets, the skills, and the systems for sustainable high performance and leadership. And what that means in practice is I'm usually working one-on-one executive leadership coaching with folks. I do a lot of work with teams and team systems in service of relational intelligence, but also high performance. And then, I have programs as well, keynotes. I do some research with RMIT and Harvard. So trying to really take a multidisciplinary approach. Now, it hasn't always had all those prongs to it. I referenced starting to do some coaching. When I was in venture capital, I loved when founders would call me at midnight and say, well, they'd be like, we're about to run out of cash. I'm fucked. What do I do? And, obviously that's a terrible call to receive. But what I loved about it is the trust and the ability to help them solve a real problem. That emotional intimacy, the trust of like, I know you're not going to judge me for this. I started to notice when founders we'd invested in, we were sitting there across the table and we were like hammering home, like, what's your monthly revenue? But I could see this founder is troubled, right? They haven't slept. They're probably going through a divorce. And it was so unnatural to not get to ask them about that stuff, but just be like, what's your bottom line? And yet I didn't have the full authority in that moment. It wasn't my fund. I tried to do sometimes my way. It ended a certain way. And I realized actually it's the person that I'm really fascinated by, not so much the product or the business model. I love those things, but I want my product to be the person, and then that they being built up and having a really strong personal leadership operating system means that they have positive ripple effects on the people they manage and the projects they work on, the positive impact they're having in the world. I started to do a bit of this when I was leading teams at High Resolve for 2 years. We were building a lot of tech products, but what I loved most about the role was hiring folks, building them up. The best part of my weeks were when I'd have my one-on-one check-ins with folks. They would turn into these like mini coaching, career coaching conversations. And I sometimes would get into trouble. It was like, May, you got to give them more feedback on the actual product. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, the product part. I should probably think about that too. Now, that was a bit of data again for me around what was pulling me and the things I'd want to do when, even when I was tired, what still got me energized. So I had the chance to do some formal coaching training with the Coactive Training Institute in California. I started digging into neuroscience. I'd studied a lot of adaptive leadership when I was at Harvard around, technical problems versus adaptive problems, the technical being more like things that are scientific or easy to solve versus adaptive human problems and where adaptive leadership is needed. And I was so excited by this idea of bringing all these different frameworks and disciplines and applying them in a more natural way in service of whatever the issue or problem was in front of me. And so I started to do a bit of coaching with one-on-one clients, startup founders who would approach me. They knew me from the venture capital days. Some of my, employees at High Resolves, I would do some free coaching with. And then I bit the bullet and decided, if not now, when? Like, let's just try this. It's a pandemic. Everyone's kind of hiding anyway. No one really knows what anyone's up to. Like, if I want to experiment and fail, failure to me in that moment meant not moving forward. And so I saw it as just learning. Like if I try it and I don't love it, or I try it and I want to do more of it, it's learning either way. The more I did it, the more I loved it. And so I just doubled down on it. I moved back to Australia. I'm coaching. I'm doing new courses. I'm meeting other coaches. I'm starting to understand maybe how to weave in more workshop style work. And then I become really interested in the systems work because I realize that you're coaching these amazing leaders, but they're stepping back into like the end of the session, they're opening the door and they're stepping back into whatever system they're in, whether it's a family system, a workplace, and they're starting to transform. And so that's even harder sometimes, because then there's even more cognitive dissonance. They're like going back into systems that don't understand them. So I started to think about working with co-founders and what would it be like to work with entire leadership teams. And I had the opportunity to do more and more of that across Australia and the US over the last few years. And it started to hit me that what we were actually working on at a high level is bringing more humanity back into the way we lead. And like when I think about even that early stories of the partner fainting, the cactus, it's really about humanity was being vacuumed out. It's like, let's bring that in. But also human leadership, in the sense that leadership is not a position of authority. Leadership is about self-authorship. It's about agency. And so what if when we're working with individuals, we could empower them with the idea that they can lead their lives? That you might be a mother going through transition, you might be leaving a job, leaving a relationship, wanting to start an organization, a company, a nonprofit, whatever it is, a project. You don't need to be the CEO to be the leader. That actually leading your energy, knowing your values, knowing how to catch your mental, hijacking, knowing what your strengths are, that's all a form of leadership, that's self-knowledge and self-awareness. And so Human Leadership Lab was really born with this idea of really building the mindsets, the skills and the systems for sustainable high performance. And I really started to focus on what I called the ABCs of human leadership, which is really adaptability, bravery, and compassion. And if we think about, like, if you were to zoom out at a really macro level, any of the engagements that I'm doing these days, if I can see that there's an opportunity for one of those A, Bs, or Cs, it's usually a hell yes, and there's values alignment. And so that's really important to me, in that we're looking for transformation, not surface level change. And that applies both at the one-on-one level all the way up to at an org level.
Whew. Soak all that in, folks. Soak all that in. I guess the next question I have for you is, what in all the different teams and founders and organizations you've worked with, what separates the ones that have ultimately succeeded or been effective versus those that have failed?
It's a really good question. Firstly, I think there's a selection bias in that people who are generally like wanting to step forward to do this work, self-development, coaching, are usually receptive to the fact that they're not fixed and there's a growth mindset there. So I would say there's a lot of folks, and you probably find this, Matt, too, with your coaching work. Sometimes people think they want coaching and they come forward, but actually what they're looking for is like a business consultant, or actually they need therapy, or they need something, a different modality. And as soon as I realize if there's language in that intro call that they're looking for a silver bullet, I'm like, I probably am not the coach for you, because I'm going to want to work on the other stuff and, the inner work, and its leadership is inside out. And if they're like, no, but I just want to be able to give feedback more effectively, I'm like, you could Google that. Like, Claude will give you a good answer. You don't need May. And so the ones that have, I would say, like, let's assume they've got the right mindset, they're coming into the work. The founders, the entrepreneurs, the leaders that have been most successful in this work, and frankly, the teams too, probably have a few kind of truths that they hold. One is they understand that leadership is not something you are, it's something you do. And therefore, if it is something you do, you're not born with it. It's not like a static quality. And therefore, everyone has leadership potential across the organization, or, in your entire family, or in your community. Like, everyone has this capacity. And therefore, if it's a capacity and it's, laden, then it can be taught, nurtured, educated, learnt. It's a skill, it's a muscle, it grows the more we practice leadership. That is really critical to the success of this work around personal development, because you recognize, in the same way that I won't go to the gym for 12 hours straight and just do bicep reps and hope for the next year my biceps are looking amazing. I got my PT kicking my butt 4 times a week to ensure that they look good, right? And that I'm strong. Now, that is the same, I think, for leaders who recognize it's a repeated practice. Right? It's not quick fixes, that like once you work on this thing, your capacity for growth actually expands. It's not that the work finishes. It's like you're now open to bigger challenges and bigger opportunities. I'd say the second thing that people who do this work and get great results get right is And probably I would say the inverse of it. Like, what's a myth that people get wrong is that pressure equals high performance. That to like build that org and scale it fast, or to do really well in this thing, or to, in the same way that actually, if you want to grow this cactus, I'm just going to
Come
bring
back
that
to
up
the
as a
cactus
perfect
again,
example.
please.
If you want to grow this plant or cactus, you do
Cactus
not
is actually at the table with us as well, guys. It's the
is it?
third
Okay,
guest on the.
good.
It's the third guest on the podcast. Yeah,
It's Mr. Cactus, alongside Starfish, of course, and Cowboy.
that's right.
I don't get this glass of water in my hand and pour the entire thing on the cactus and then never water it again, right? So pressure can drown and leads to like short-term wins, long-term pain. And teams and leaders who understand it's a marathon, but like there's a high intensity interval training component, metaphorically speaking, to the work, that you have seasons, that you work with your circadian rhythms, you work with your menstrual cycle, you work with the seasons of wherever you're living, that life itself has seasons, parenthood, getting older, being a sandwich generation, parents getting older, when your child's an infant, very different to when your child's a 10-year-old. So I think that leadership in your life is no different to leadership of others and in your team. That idea then that if it's not about trying to push as hard as possible, but it's about pull, leaders who are able to manage their energy know that saying no is just as important as saying yes. And that actually you need to understand what drives you, that deeply listening to yourself and understanding what's calling you, your intuition, they're the ones who get the most out of this work. And sometimes the language I might use to talk to someone who's hyper rational or scientific might be, look, we're going to be coaching both your thinking brain and your feeling brain. And when we're doing the work, then they realize that what lives in the body, like that pain in your gut, or when you're feeling a bit like shrunk in the call, it's all data for us about what's aligned or not aligned. And that it's not weird or woo-woo to go there. In fact, like we're not going to get as great results if we don't. And that's where the deep transformation comes in. So that whole person approach, leaders who recognize body, mind, and spirit are all part of who we are, get a lot from this work. And then I think the thing that I'm also learning more for my own leadership of my business and company, but I think, you got to practice what you preach. And I think the work that we do is the most humbling in that you cannot be doing this work if you're not practicing it yourself. Like you'll quickly expose yourself. And so the thing for me that's been the most difficult, and I think I see mirrored back to me as when it's done well, it has huge transformative impact, is when we can recognize that we don't have to have all the answers. That leadership is not about being the greatest expert in an area. That leadership is actually not about you. It's about what you're enabling around you. It's being that fertile soil for others to grow. And that actually, if that's the case, like leadership is not about having all the answers. That's actually especially important now where the world's not static. Leadership is actually about adaptability. How quickly can you adapt? How mentally prepared are you for constant change? Whether it's AI, whether it's geopolitical, macroeconomic relationship changes, parents aging, whatever it is, like change is the only constant. And so leaders who are over-identifying with their technical expertise or their, rational selves, often it's painful because we haven't fully owned that actually what makes us effective leaders and not just technicians or managers is our ability to know that we don't know all the answers, to say, I don't know. That's where bravery comes in, but also to be compassionate and recognize, like, what am I feeling? It's not just what do I think, but maybe I'm scared right now. We've seen amazing examples during the pandemic and during recent years where leaders who admitted they don't have all the answers. Or we look at how AI is impacting a lot of organizations and systems and cultures and workplaces right now. It's the leaders who say this is disruptive and we don't fully know how this is going to play out. It would be bullshitting you if we said we did, but we do know that there's some things we need to think about. We need to all become a lot more agile. We need to skill up, or we need to be prepared for change. We need to work on our analytical thinking. We can't promise you we know exactly how this is going to look like, but there will be change. That type of leadership, of being able to acknowledge you don't know what you don't know yet, but you also know what you don't know. The things that we'll know in a year and we'll update you. I think leading through curiosity and through compassion, not through expert answers, is one of the things that I've seen teams do really well. And it links back to this idea of both having accountability but psychological safety. Psychological safety to come up with ideas, to test them, to get them wrong, but in service of growth, and that you're not going to be penalized for not knowing, not having the answer, or getting it wrong.
Oh
Really, that
yeah.
answers
Yeah,
qualities.
no, and it does. It does. I mean, AI is like obviously a very hot topic right now, and it's moving very
It is.
fast. How do you propose that founders, entrepreneurs, leaders right now can relate to AI
Mm.
and how they integrate it into their businesses? I mean, we've also just seen, X has just laid off a huge amount of their workforce because of not even the actual impact of AI, but because what they anticipate and they're starting to already see. And I
Pretty
think
crazy.
one of the things I've noticed, and it's a bit of a human condition, is that people can very quickly blame things like AI for taking, quote unquote, their jobs. Whereas I think what you and I both know, ironically, I also did my master's thesis on adaptive leadership and gender
I love it.
stereotypes. I just did it at Deakin University in Melbourne, not Harvard. But
Still
but
just as good.
there's this there's this notion of like, actually, if we can learn to be adaptive and we can learn the rules of the game of change, then we're gonna survive the longest and be able to lead. But I think it's a very hot topic right now. I mean, how do you think the best
Mm.
founders, leaders, teams can navigate this next era with AI coming in?
Amazing question. And I'd again be lying if I said I have all the answers. I would say, like, exactly as you said, AI and its growth exponentially right now and in the next years is simply going to accelerate forces we're already seeing. So I think folks who are already fear based, and this is where mindset is so important. I don't want to pretend that skilling up is hard. Sorry, is easy. It's hard. But I don't think this is actually a technical problem so much as an adaptive one, in that I think what's really difficult is not only is there going to be loss of jobs, there's going to be also creation of new jobs, right? Like we'd be ridiculous to think that the world is going to be static for the next 10, 20 years. When I was at grad school 12 years ago, there were jobs that now exist that absolutely had no idea they could exist. So if we're going to be in old frames at what is, we're always going to be suffering, whether it's AI or something else. Pandemic also shook things up for people. Besides the fact that the pandemic was difficult from a obviously disease management perspective, actually what was more difficult was disruption to usual ways of doing things. AI is a disruption to usual ways of doing things, and therefore, as leaders, this is an amazing opportunity to practice the ABCs. One, agility, adaptability are the most important names of the game. The World Economic Forum last year, and they've done this now for a number of years in a row in their Future of Jobs report, they talk about after analytical and critical thinking, which is the number one quality, even more important in the advent of AI. Of the next kind of 10 qualities or skills that are needed for the future of work, three of them relate to adaptability. They're related to resilience, agility, flexibility, or lifelong learning or curiosity. That is pretty important, right? In that the ability to adapt and the ability to manage losses around you at a pace that you can handle, and the quicker you get at that, is a superpower. And so, what that means is not over attaching to your job title or identity or ways of working, and being curious about what are some of these technologies? How can I? And I would say some of the best ways that we could practice this is build it into your personal workflows, experiment. Experimentation is a big part of this. Encourage experimentation for yourself and in your teams. Even if your company has nothing to do with AI, think of how do you incentivize your folks around you to be curious about learning rather than coming at it from a fear-based perspective. Companies, for example, like Canva, gave their employees a week to just tinker with tools, to work with as many AI tools in their personal life or professionally, and then some of them actually could relate maybe to the company. I've seen a lot of folks around me try this. Some of the leaders I work with are building, little AI agents, or even like basic AI tools for how they're managing their finances at home, or their to-do list with their husband or wife, and just playing with it to essentially, one, empathize with folks around them who might find it hard or not know what's going on, but two, to normalize that we're always learning. I think the second thing is we need to be really compassionate that it naturally will lead to loss. And there's always some pain associated with loss, even though eventually it might be for the benefit of folks. The reality is we don't know how largest corporations out there or governments are going to work with AI. What is that going to mean in terms of social security systems? And so as entrepreneurs and as leaders in our own life, I think if you're leading teams, it's to normalize it. Yeah, there's going to be some loss and change. In the same way that the Industrial Revolution changed a lot, or the dot-com era, or social media, like there's going to be all these advents of change along the way. And part of what we need to normalize is that things will look differently, and that some of us will feel like losers in the equation, but that there's opportunities that come from that as well. But also create space for people to articulate their pain or their fears, and deeply listening in our organizations is going to be really important. In the same way that if there's really hard things happening out there in the world, whether it's COVID at the time, or I was living in the US in 2020 during the murder of George Floyd, and for a lot of our Black community and friends, that was it was really difficult. And for many of us, it didn't even have to be Black to show up to work the next day and to just pretend everything was okay. And so actually naming and normalizing pain and loss, I think is a really important leadership act. It doesn't solve the problem of how do we adapt our leadership model or our business model to handle AI, but it's the human side of the change. Now, from a leadership development perspective, I'm really excited. A lot of coaches get scared like, May, but my clients will just use ChatGPT or Claude to answer that. And I said, but of course, like as a coach, we should expect that before our client shows up, they'll probably run it through ChatGPT. And in fact, they're going to probably come back to us with even deeper questions and deeper answers. And so the human relationship, being able to deeply listen, pick up on what's not being said, pick up on emotion, expression, intuition, that is at a premium. Being human in the way we lead. And I think AI is going to actually open up space and time for organizations to work on the more difficult, hairy, call it wicked policy problems, or call it like difficult human questions. Like we're going to actually have more space and energy for that. And that is going to come, I think, as a result of good leadership who will recognize we can now free people up a little bit more to go even deeper. When we are using humans, we want it to be super deep, because if AI can do a lot that we already do, then as humans, we should be focusing on the highest order activities. And that's matters of the heart and spirit, my sense is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautifully said. And it's you remind me of a thought I had the other day when I was out for a walk listening to a podcast, and
Yeah.
the phrase that I've learned to love and hate is unprecedented times, because we heard it so much during COVID, and
So
I remember hearing it during COVID and just thinking to myself, can you remind me of a time when it was precedented times? Like, it's
so
always
true.
been unprecedented times. It's always been new or different. And sure, there's maybe been like things where like, oh, we've seen something like this before, but it's always like, even in recessions always come around, but they always look different or have a different, because that's how nature works. And
It's
so,
so well said. I mean, because it is, you're right. Everything is in some ways unprecedented. And that's why I like the difference between planning versus preparedness. I think leadership is not about planning. Like management is about planning. You could have a 5-year plan, but then you have to throw it out tomorrow because AI or pandemic or, your partner's, God forbid, sick, or like the plan is a plan until it's not a plan. Preparedness for change, no one can take away from you. And we know this, like being on the trail, right? We could plan to take this route and we're going to leave at this time and we're all prepared but then preparedness is we wake up to like a blizzard or a windstorm or something, and you got to, actually leave
or what
5
happened
hours
on the
early.
first night in Peru, we woke up and there was, 5 inches of snow.
That's
It was like,
it.
oh, okay, this morning's going to look a little bit different.
That's
Um,
exactly it.
the
Actually, we
piece of,
hiked together a lot that day.
if we did. Yeah, the preparedness for change. I love that as like it's like almost like a core message to come back to. It's like is being prepared for change and resourcing yourself with
That's
actual
exactly it.
resources, physical resources, but also mental, physical, emotional resources as well, right?
And knowing, actually, part of being prepared for change, and I think it's just as relevant for AI, is knowing your natural tendencies when there's fear or uncertainty, whether it's that amygdala fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, or, those inner saboteurs. If you know when there's uncertainty, you're more likely to respond like X, Y, or Z, to actually know that about yourself and catch it, notice it, name it, tame it, reframe it. Like, we can almost preempt. For me, I know the thing that often holds me back is I call it my inner tornado. It's not who I am. It's like that default neural pathway. When one thing goes wrong, if I'm not in a great state or I'm really tired, it will be like the tornado effect of like, oh my God, everything's fucked. It's all going to fall apart. And it's like, actually, no. This person said no. It doesn't mean the entire project doomed, or, oh, my partner gave me feedback. Oh, it's all over. They're going to break up with me. It's like, no, it's just what it is. Stop jumping ladder of inference and, jumping to conclusions. And so I think self-awareness around all these changes is a big part of leadership, which is why, when we talk about leadership, it's a concept that gets thrown out. It's all about, it starts with inner leadership, knowing yourself, managing your personal operating system. How do I manage my energy? What do I know about where my mental traps come up? What are the situations? What do I know is really strong about myself, but when taken to the dark side or overextended becomes a liability? Care or connection or empathy is beautiful. Taken to the extreme becomes people pleasing or like burnout. And there's many other examples. And then like knowing your emotions, knowing your values, understanding your intuition. If we can manage that and control that, that's ultimately all we can control, then we're essentially prepared for whatever the world throws at us.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. I mean, you're about to get on a plane to Nepal in a couple of days, and I have no doubt that a lot of what we've spoken about will come in handy as you fly into what is one of the most dangerous airports in the world. I've personally flown there; it is quite an experience.
I was gonna say, Matt, please don't release this episode to my parents until I'm back.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. No, I'll keep it. Keep it close to my heart. Um, what's next on the horizon for you? I guess from a leadership perspective, from a founder perspective, even just from a May perspective, like where are you going next, and what are you excited by in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. Look, I think one of the things I've learned, probably unsurprisingly, is you don't really know what you don't know yet. And part of what I hope will always be true in how I answer a question like this is I always want an element of surprise or wonder, adventure. I think part of what makes something like Nepal and Everest so exciting is because I have no freaking clue what it's how's going to be. I don't want to know. And I think part of that is being present. Like what's next for me is being super present to what's in front of me. And actually, ironically, to not, it's almost like not answering a question, is what's next is being fully present in the moment. So that can be attuned to the opportunities before me, but also what my heart longs for. And I'm so lucky to be living a life now that I have an amazing partner. I live in a part of the world that feels very aligned. Obviously, it's got its pros and cons sometimes. And I do really feel like who I am in my work is who I am everywhere else. There's no, may at work. And so I feel like being present will allow me to fully absorb the beauty around me. And it reminds me of this saying we were saying, kind of everyone talks about unprecedented times. I think another saying we hear, but we never use ironically, is the good old days. Someone once told me like, these are the good old days. One day we'll look at these days. Oh, Matt, remember the good old days? Remember when we first met and we were chatting on that podcast? So if these are the good old days, what does it look like to soak it up? Be fully present to it. And that, I think, is my greatest wish for everyone, but also for myself, because it's not historically something I've done. I think where that leads to as a mindset is I've become quite an experimenter in my life. And rather than having to have all the answers about what comes next, I want to continue to run leadership experiments, whether that means new programs, new modules and frameworks, new ways of going even deeper with my one-on-one clients. I've started to, for example, provide a lot more holistic support. I noticed a lot of the folks that I worked with, for example, there was somatic work needed to be done. So, I bring in breathwork expert, or I might introduce them to a nutritionist, and suddenly like there's this holistic approach to personal development or to a PT. And that is something I couldn't have planned for. But when you're present and listening, like, oh, I keep getting asked that, like being able to actually expand your business offerings around that is really important to me. One of the lessons I learned in the last year, and I think we talked about this when we were on the mountain, at the time, I think I told you I had hired someone and I was thinking, I'm going to build this huge global leadership company. But I was thinking of it in terms of growth and scale, meaning like more people coaching, more people doing. And I tried some of that and I got early taste of the fact that if something didn't feel right to me, and it was that it was moving away from my original mission of depth and quality. And that I think part of what's next for me is not scaling for scale's sake, but thinking about what are ways to bring universal messages that are really important to the masses without diluting the things that I feel like are my zone of genius or where I want to reach mastery, and staying true to those parts and always getting to do the things that I love without feeling like success means moving beyond that and then just managing people doing the things that I actually loved. So I don't want to stop doing the things that I love. I don't even want to make myself redundant. And I think part of it was also remaining founder centric in the work that I do, which means having to say yes to fewer jobs and engagements, and actually having to be really, really good at taming the people pleaser saboteur, because you can't say yes to everyone. And that is actually a new frontier for me, which is depth, quality, going deeper. What I'm experimenting a bit more with these days is bringing that neuroscience and somatic work into play. And I would say kind of the things I've loved the most these last year, and I'm trying to expand and will be expanding more of, is retreats, offsites, and team experiences. Again, the type of moments we had together, say on that mountain, we just know the power of when you get a couple of days away from the day-to-day to go deep with folks, and particularly leaders, magic is possible. And so to be able to do more of that work for cohorts is something I'm really excited for. And personally, it would be remiss of me not to show my little postcard here, which is my core values, excellence, freedom, and generosity, but ultimately leading a life of vigor, which is like, when I'm in it, I want to bring my best and all, and I want it to be generative and alive. And that's ultimately what I think my definition of success is these days.
Amazing. Well, I can vouch for you on this conversation and also on the mountain, bringing a lot of vigor. It's definitely seeing you. And I just want to say a huge thank you for being on the podcast today and sharing your story and all the different chapters that were inside it, but also, sharing, I think, like a really refreshing and authentic and heart-centered perspective on what it means to be a leader and what it means to be a coach of leaders as well. So thank you so much. And I hope you have a beautiful trip in Nepal. You'll have a beautiful time there. It's really special.
I'll miss you a lot. So Matt, for the listeners out there, Matt was our jukebox, but he also was the heart and soul. Not only did he was the arbiter of trail names. We had to go submit our votes. He brought so much music, life, literally, metaphorically. So we got big shoes to fill. I might even have to take a little portable speaker to be to be doing that. But it was really awesome to have this conversation. I also want to just thank you for the work that you do, because it takes a heart-centered leader, takes one to know one. But I'm also very much inspired by the way that you show up and the giving permission and space. And as someone who's been on had the pleasure of being on different podcasts throughout the years, your ability to hold this space and invite someone to bring their authentic self is actually a real gift and a skill itself. So keep doing what you're doing. And I also just love hearing other stories on your podcast. So onwards and upwards.
Amazing. Thanks, May.
Thanks,
All right,
Matt.
thank you, everyone. We'll see you on the next episode. Thank you, May. Have a great time in Nepal.
Appreciate it.
See you on the other side.
See ya.
Thank you so much for joining me on the Another Way podcast today. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with May. What an amazing woman. Seriously, so inspiring. I feel like she's one of those people that just being around her makes you want to do better. Just being around her makes you want to be the best leader that you can be, the best human that you can be. She's incredible at what she does. If you are interested in connecting with May, or if this episode connected with you in some way, please share it with someone in your network. Please drop May a message on LinkedIn or Instagram or wherever you can find her to say a big thank you and let her know how this episode impacted you too. And if you enjoyed the episode, leave us a positive review. It always helps just in terms of getting the word out there about what we're building at Another Way. I want to say a huge thank you from me as well. I'm really, really grateful that we're back on the podcast and we're bringing more and more people into our world. And if you have any guests that you'd love us to talk to or any topics you'd like us to cover, please email me at matt@anotherway.au. I would love to hear what you'd love to hear about or who you'd like us to talk to as we continue to build Another Way and as we continue to build this community of incredible leaders from around the world that are all carving their own path. All right, thanks so much, and I will see you next time.